This week saw the release of the Kaito Files, an add-on story expansion for 2021's Lost Judgment. It's an interesting piece of content for many reasons, so I want to tell you today if I think it's worth the asking price. To clear some things up immediately, for one thing, I was given the base game of Lost Judgment for review purposes by Sega back when it released, but I've since purchased my own physical copy for my shelf, and I bought the $35 season pass for the game with my own money, just for full disclosure. The Kaito Files isn't a standalone release. You have to own Lost Judgment to access it, and you can gain that access by either buying it as its own piece of DLC for $30 USD, or by grabbing Lost Judgment's Season Pass / Ultimate Edition thing for, I think, $35 USD. All of these digital editions and upgrades and Season Pass things, they confuse my frail, simple mind, but I think I have this right. Basically, if you want to grab it at all, just double check that the page you're buying from includes the Kaito Files. So yeah, about that Season Pass real quick. If you haven't seen my review on Lost Judgment proper, and I don't blame you because it's a half-hour long, I concluded that the then released DLC packs were a tricky proposition. The packs offer much more benefit to someone who purchases them with the game immediately, as opposed to someone who does everything in the base game first and then goes to buy them, which is how I did it. I want to recap what's in them quickly, since it may not be entirely clear if you're just looking at the store page for this and haven't played the game yet. There's the School Stories expansion pack for $5, which gives you a fun but gimmicky boxing fighting style to use in fights. You get a few extra dance moves and a new outfit for the dance club storyline at the school, a unique robot for the robotics club that, to my recollection, isn't even the best robot you can use. You get a new motorcycle for the biker club storyline, as well as a new course to race on, and finally it adds Sugiura, Higashi, and Kaito as sparring partners for the boxing club. Next up is the Detective Essentials pack for $10, which, frankly put, also gives you a lot of frivolous things to idly tinker with. You can change the color of a dog's fur, you get 4 extra Master System games to play, you get a new skateboard park to mess around in, and a hoverboard to use, which is actually kind of fun even if it's purely cosmetic. You get an extra decal for your drone, a super boss for the game's gauntlet mode, and a ton of extracts you can use in gameplay, which give you temporary power-ups. Most of the substance in this pack is advertised as additional girlfriends, which actually means 3 little side stories involving romantic interest for Yagami that add to the one found in the base game. These stories are fun, but for $10 on its own, it's a hard sell. With these 2 packs totaling the $15 and the Kaito Files being $30 on its own, it's clearly trying to guide you to just spend $35 on a season pass to get all of it for $10 cheaper. It's been a hard sell to do that for a few months because there were very few details on the Kaito Files up until very recently, and as you may have noticed, most of these items are very specific, one-off things that don't matter that much. Most of the items are relegated to side activities that were already geared for you to be able to clear them without the DLC. But if you're going to buy them, you may as well buy them before starting the game, because then you might actually use them. There's little incentive to use a lot of these items if you're coming back after beating these parts of the game. Meanwhile, things like the girlfriend side story specifically seem to be designed to be played along the main story. One of the characters involved is the school nurse, who characters even refer to, but just isn't around if you don't have the DLC. Her plot involves continually coming back in and checking on her, which is something that makes a lot more sense to do if you're doing it alongside the main story. Basically, it was a hard sell. I found it tricky to recommend blind buying a $35 season pass when the main course of the content was still months off, and the content that was there seemed to mostly be of use to players who hadn't started the game yet. The Kaito Files expansion is that main course, letting you saddle up and hit Kamurocho as Masaharu Kaito, Yagami Detective Agency's right-hand man. And yes, just Kamurocho, you can't explore Ijincho in this. The story takes place in January 2022, some weeks after the events of the main game. It offers no spoilers for the main game, so if you ever want to take a break from it, or even just play this first outright, you can do so with no risk of weird story issues. It's not entirely self-contained, but it provides all the context you'll need to follow its main story with no problems. So with an entry price that's half the usual asking price for a new Yakuza game, an easy question presents itself. Does the Kaito Files offer half a Yakuza game's worth of content? The easy answer to that is no, it doesn't quite do that. I had found all of its collectibles, unlocked all of Kaito's skills, done all of the optional battles against a context-barren string of enemies, and seen all of its story in just under 8 hours on hard difficulty. And quick side note on those enemies, seriously, they just exist to fight and only randomly walk around the map when you equip a certain item. I wish there was some kind of explanation for them because it just feels cheap as is. Gameplay-wise, the Kaito Files serves as a greatest hits of the Judgment style, giving you quite a bit of combat as well as a few sections to tick off the now usual boxes. Chasing, tailing, sneaking, and quite a few sections where you'll examine an environment for clues all present themselves here. Playing as Kaito brings a couple new tricks to the table, technically, like having to seek out specific scents and noise sources, but the examination gameplay remains the same through this. That said, it is funny to go sniffing around as him, so it does have that going for it. Kaito can also hit up some of the usual minigame functions. There's no karaoke, sadly, but he can go for darts, knock some home runs at the batting cages, hit up Club Sega, etc. Restaurants and stores across Kamurocho are all on the menu as well, though there's no completion list tied to any of this, so it's purely for your own leisure. Basically, there's no reason to do these in the Kaito Files versus the main game unless you just really like being Kaito, and hey, that's fair. I mean, look at that shirt. As I alluded to, the main new side content here is finding collectibles around Kamurocho. Using Kaito's sense of smell and hearing, you can find things like armor, darts, and a baseball bat, sometimes given to you by a cat, which would be a great Dr. Seuss story. The two main collectibles tie back to Kaito's past. 20 of the Matsugane family crests are scattered around, again, largely given to you by finding cats, and there are also specific parts of the city that will cause Kaito to reminisce for just a couple sentences before unlocking access to certain moves in his skill tree. As a quick tip, one of these skills also requires you to get a combat bonus by doing Kaito's perfect block in his second combat style. That combat point bonus can only be accrued once per fight, so just go in knowing you'll need to do that 10 times if you want to go for all 5 of the trophies. When it comes to those combat styles, Kaito has some interesting quirks, but on the surface at least, resembles two of Kiryu's Yakuza 0 and Kiwami styles quite a bit. Brawler and Beast, called Bruiser and Tank here. Bruiser is your usual offense-focused style, with a wrestling-esque grab that leads into a ground slam. A neat quirk of it is that if you toss a punch at the right timing as an enemy attacks you, you'll deflect them and gain a boost to your power, general speed, and combo execution. The same applies with Tank's perfect block of attacks, just for increased defense instead. Tank lets you pick up objects in the environment mid-combo, much like Beast did in the aforementioned games, so it's a pretty familiar style if you happen to have put some time into those entries. Kaito's combat is fun enough to mess with, but frankly it doesn't quite hold a candle to the potential of Yagami's movesets in the main game. It'll get you through the dozens of fights you'll get into, but none of the fights proved all that challenging, so I never had much purpose in trying to get fancy with anything. It's suitable, it's fun, but I wish there was more going on with it. And that feeling extends to the Kaito Files as a whole for me. It offers just enough to make you feel that some work was put in, but some lower polish in areas alongside the total runtime prevent the affair from feeling like it's more than an extra story bolted on months later, instead of a substantial, meaty incentive to grab the season pass. Its greatest strength is its narrative, and when it gets going, it's certainly engaging, if not rather predictable. It just takes a few hours to get going, and when that's a huge chunk of the runtime, it's certainly felt. Without spoiling anything, the premise is that a rich man approaches Kaito with a request for his detective skills to find his missing wife, who happens to be Kaito's old love Mikiko from his days in the Yakuza. Along the way, he meets a slew of fresh faces alongside Mikiko's son, born not long after Kaito and Mikiko split. While it isn't hard to tell where it will twist and turn to, the journey is still good fun and provides a lot of great depth to Kaito's character, helping elevate him beyond the charming, reliable muscle he's been so far to even more of a great in the series. I can't really say much more without spoiling anything, but I'll just say that given the topsy-turvy nature of whether we may even get another Judgment entry at this rate, the Kaito Files does an amicable job of telling a brisk, dramatic, and satisfying potential conclusion for one of RGG's leading men. And if we do get more, it introduces some interesting variables to consider going forward. Whether the Kaito Files is worth it to you depends on what you come to Judgment in Yakuza 4. If it's for dozens and dozens of hours of packed side content in addition to a main tale, this likely isn't for you, at least not until it's on a pretty solid discount. If you love the characters and world of these games, then it's still a bit of a tall order to plop down that much cash for it, but ultimately I found it worthwhile. Once in a while the season pass does go on sale, and I could much more heartily recommend it for about $10 less. As it stands, this feels like it's here for the truly hardcore fans at this price, and even then, I'm one of those fans here wishing there was just a few more hours of game to help justify that price. It feels like a toe in the water to see if producing smaller, more contained stories to supplement larger games is viable for the series. And I'm not against that idea at all. I love seeing this game world through different perspectives and with different casts, so I hope it's something RGG Studios considers again. But I also hope they consider putting more meat on the bone next time, or at least charging less for this amount of meat. Part of my negativity comes from offering a $35 season pass for months with no solid details on what the main part of that package would be like until a few weeks before its release. I think there should be a better way of managing expectations and communicating details going forward, especially when the DLC situation for Lost Judgment already felt a bit off-putting, as I talked about in my main review. Again, ultimately I did enjoy my time here. I just feel like something needs to give one way or the other, either more game for the same price or the same kind of game for a lower cost. At worst, putting aside the fact that it was included for free with its game, it's a solid step up from a similar experiment in Yakuza Kiwami 2's The Majima Saga, which offered no character upgrades, effectively no side content, and a story that felt like a retread of Majima's time in Yakuza 0. While that was fun enough for what it was, this feels like it took in some good feedback from that to offer a better experience. If Yakuza 8 is going to have a smaller side game as DLC, I hope they take in feedback from the Kaito Files to make it even better in turn. At worst, no matter what, I'll always carry the memory of Kaito sniffing to let me know there was a hidden item around, sniffing into this random Steam vent, and pulling out a demonic fundoshi. A hearty thanks to my patrons for their demonic fundoshi support, and a special thank you to Adrian, Buckles Chucklow, Daniel, Goldstormo7, Harry, James Boss, Jeet, Joey, Lewis Jones, Starkiller926, Svendelica, That Trev Guy, and The Crazy Even.